Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I am here to talk about my most anticipated adult releases for the second half of 2019. Alright, if my queer releases video was late, this one is just the most late ever, but I didn't want to miss out on a chance to still, talk about these books that I'm anticipating for the second half of 2019, because I want to be able to tell all of you about them. I want you to know what I'm looking forward to. I want you all to have a chance to look forward to these books. These are all adult releases. A bunch of them are queer, and I will be sure to tell you which ones those are. But with that out of the way, let's just get started. Let me tell you about my most anticipated adult releases for the second half of 2019. The first book that I want to talk about is Temper by Layne Fargo, which was released on July 2nd. Temper is an adult thriller with a bisexual protagonist that is set in the Chicago theater scene. It's about an actress named Kira who has finally landed the role of a lifetime, but acting in this show, Temper means working with the mercurial director, Malcolm, and while Kira is sure that she can handle Malcolm and the way that he pushes actors past their limits on stage and off, she's not so sure about the theater's co-founder, Joanna. Finding queer thrillers and mystery books in general can be incredibly difficult to do, and this one sounds absolutely fantastic. This one just sounds perfectly up my alley. Next up, Wanderers by Chuck Wendig was also released on July 2nd. This is an apocalyptic book about a collection of characters. They are all from super different walks of life, but it begins with Shauna, who wakes up one morning to find her sister sleepwalking, but no matter what she does, she can't wake her up. So as they set out on the road, Shauna following along, they run into a lot of others who are in the same situation. Sleepwalkers or people like Shauna, who are called shepherds. It's about the end of civilization walking towards doom, and how possibly the reactions to this traumatic event might be even worse than the event itself. I absolutely love Chuck Wendig's presence online, but I've never had the chance to read any of his books. I'm really hoping Wanderers is going to be the first time that I get to do that. Bookish Life of Nina Hill by Abbi Wexman was released on July 9th, and it is about an introverted book lover named Nina who suddenly finds out about the death of a father she never knew existed. And along with finding out about this death, she finds out about an entire troupe of family members who actually want to meet her. This is completely upsetting Nina's life of solitude, of order, of having things just the way she likes them, but it might also mean an entirely new group of people to love and depend on. I love books about bookish characters. Nina also works in a bookstore, which is a thing I really love, and I think this is going to be really sweet and lovely. Another bookish release from July 9th is The Last Book Party by Dukess. This is a historical fiction novel. It's set in the summer of 1987, and it's about a young woman who finally possibly gets to have a job in the publishing industry. She also gets invited to the biggest publishing night of the year, where everyone goes to this event dressed as book characters. But once there, she starts to discover that everything is not as it seems. So this is historical fiction, it's a mystery, it is literary, and it sounds really interesting. Next, I want to talk about Compass Rose by Anna Burke. This is a sci-fi story set in a swashbuckling 26th century, which is already enough for me. It's about a girl named Rose who is born facing due north, which has given her this sort of inherent idea of where the cardinal points are on a compass. This earns her a treasured place among a fleet, and she ends up joining a crew, a band of mercenaries who set out into pirate territory. This is also a queer story with a female-female romance. So basically, this is pirates, but it's also queer, and it's also in the future, so it sounds like absolutely everything. Next up, a book that was released on July 16th, This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. I've already read this book. If you want to hear my review, I will leave a wrap-up linked above, as well as down in the description. But this is a speculative sci-fi adventure with a Romeo and Juliet twist. Basically, it's about two opposing agents on opposite sides of a sprawling time war. But even even though they are supposed to be enemies, they are one another's greatest foe, they start to write letters to one another and slowly start to fall in love. But both of these agents are women, so it is a female-female Romeo and Juliet time travel story that is written in such a poetic and gorgeous way. It's breathtaking and inventive, and it was one of my most anticipated releases of 2019, and it turned out to be one of my absolute favorite books so far this year and maybe ever. Definitely lived up to the hype, and I suggest you pick up a copy. Moving on, I want to talk about Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which was released on July 23rd. This is a story set in the Jazz Age and inspired by Mexican folklore about a girl who is cleaning her wealthy grandfather's house when she opens up a small box and accidentally releases the Mayan god of death. I already have so many of Silvia's books on my TBR. They sound absolutely incredible, and this one has been hyped for months. It has one of my favorite covers of 2019. I think it looks gorgeous, and I think it's going to be gorgeous inside as well. Next up, I want to talk about Blacklight by Kimberly Parsons, which was released on August 13th. This is a collection of short stories about life in Texas. It sounds like an inventive and interesting collection. There are so many different stories and ideas being discussed here, but also a bunch of these stories are queer, dealing with bisexual and lesbian protagonists. I have been on a search this year to find more short story collections all by one author, and so this is just one of the ones I discovered along the way. I think it sounds absolutely brilliant. Next, I want to talk about The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This was released on August 13th and is actually an older Japanese novel that I believe is just now being published in English. This is a dystopian story about an unnamed island off of an unnamed coast where things disappear, big and small. For the most part, when these things disappear, people don't notice, they fade into the background, but every now and then people do remember the things that have been lost, and they live in fear of a group called the Memory Police, who are dedicated to making sure no one remembers lost things. This feels like another one of the most hyped books of 2019. I see it constantly. I think it sounds gorgeous and fascinating and completely unlike anything I've ever read before, so I am really hoping I can pick up a copy sooner rather than later. Moving into September, I want to talk about Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis, which was released at the beginning of September on September 3rd. I originally heard about this book as I hear about so many books from Adriana over at the channel Perpetual Pages. They did a video called 5 Reasons to Read Cantoras, and I highly recommend that video. I'll go ahead and leave it linked in the description. This is a book that starts in 1977 in Uruguay, and it is about 5 queer women who sort of have to make a place for themselves. In a time and in a place where queerness is incredibly dangerous, these 5 women find each other, and they also find a relatively abandoned island where they can all go together, where they can bring lovers or friends, and this is set over 35 years of these women's lives. This sounds like an absolutely brilliant book. I am so excited. This just barely came in the mail for me today, so I'm hoping I can start reading it like immediately. I think at this point most of you know that historical fiction queer narratives are a passion of mine, and I can't wait to get started in this one. Another queer story that's a little bit lighter is All the Better Part of Me by Molly Ringel. This was also released on September 3rd and is about a main character who is coming to terms with being bisexual, which is great considering you can see the bisexual flag literally on the cover of this book. So this is about a 25-year-old American actor named Sinter who is currently working in London and coming to terms with his bisexuality at a very unfortunate time. He left his family in the Pacific Northwest in order to pursue acting in London, and he is engaged in this sort of flirtatious behavior with his director Fiona, but he can't stop thinking about the guy he left at home, Andy. Andy, his gay best friend who he once kissed when they were 15. I'm always incredibly eager to find books about bisexual guys because I think it is something that is explored way less in fiction. I'm so glad that more and more people are starting to write those stories, so I can't wait to read this one. On September 10th, we celebrated the release of one of the most hyped books of the entire year, Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is a sci-fi space adventure with lesbian necromancers and Gideon, who is a swordswoman. It's supposed to be full of humor, weird politics, and like I said, it's one of the most hyped releases of the entire year, basically. By the time this was released, everybody in the world was talking about it. I am hoping that I am able to read this book soon, and I am super, super hoping that it lives up to all of the early hype. Next up, Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdez. This was released on September 17th. This is a book about a space crew who travel across space delivering cargo, and they are led by Captain Eva Innocente, and then her sister is kidnapped. And they have to set out on a mission to try to save her. More specifically, they have to go on a series of incredibly dangerous missions to earn money so that they can pay her sister's ransom. Again, this is a case of I love space stories about a ragtag group of people, especially if it's one that's funny, and this one sounds like it's going to be. Besides having a Latina main character, there's also a significant non-binary side character and a black side character. There's even more than that. It sounds like a super fun space adventure, which are, like, everything I love in the world. Next up on September 24th, we have Sorted by Jackson Bird. The actual full length of this title is Sorted, Growing Up, Coming Out, and Finding My Place. Jackson Bird is a trans guy and a YouTuber who I absolutely love, and this is his memoir about coming out as trans when he was 25 years old. A ton of the transgender nonfiction that I really want to read or that I have read has come recommended to me by Jackson. I've loved his YouTube channel for years, and I'm incredibly eager to read his new memoir. Okay, now we get to jump into October, and the first book that I want to talk about is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, of course, which is being released on October 1st. This is another one of the most hyped releases of 2019, Leigh Bardugo's first foray into adult fiction. This is about a girl named Alex who is the newest member and also the most unlikely member of Yale's freshman class. By age 20, she was the sole survivor of this horrific homicide, and while she is in a hospital bed recovering, she's approached with the opportunity to attend Yale as long as she does something specific. That specific thing being that she has to explore and learn as much as she can about Yale's secret societies. I have my copy of this book pre-ordered. I am absolutely over the moon excited to go and meet Leigh Bardugo. She is going to be here in Washington, in Seattle, at the beginning of October. I will be at that event. Let me know if you're going to be at that event. But as soon as I have that book in my hand, and as soon as I have it signed by Leigh, you better bet that I will be starting it immediately. Also on October 1st, we have The Twisted Ones by T. Kingfisher, which sounds like an incredibly spooky book. It's about a young woman named Mouse whose grandmother dies, and she sets out to clean out her grandmother's house. It is just her and her dog alone in this house in the woods. It seems like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but it turns out her grandmother was a hoarder, so she is spending ages and ages in this house trying to clean it out. And then she comes across her step-grandfather's journal. When she first starts to read it, it seems to be full of these sort of nonsensical rants until some of the stuff that's described in the journal starts to happen to her. This sounds super creepy. It's a story about a woman alone in the woods when creepy stuff starts to happen, and I'm very eager to read it. Also on October 1st, we have In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This is Carmen's memoir. You might know some of Carmen Maria Machado's other work. Her Body and Other Parties, which is a story collection, got a lot of hype last year on BookTube. This is a memoir where Carmen is finally trying to deal with head-on the fact that she was in an abusive same-sex relationship. It's also being really celebrated as an inventive memoir, as a memoir that's doing things that have never been done in memoir form before, so I'm sure this is going to contain a lot of really interesting, odd elements, which from what I know about Carmen Maria Machado's writing is absolutely par for the course. I think this sounds absolutely fascinating and I can't wait to read it. I hope everyone's ready for October 1st because we still have more books to talk about that are being released on that day. It is just all the releases. The next one I want to talk about is Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. So yes, Stephen Chbosky has a new book. This is a super bulky horror novel, which is not Stephen Chbosky's thing that he's known for. He's known for writing and then eventually writing and directing Perks of Being a Wallflower book movie. This is the first book that he's written in 20 years, but I'm really excited to read it. It's about a mother and her young son, Kate and Christopher, and Kate takes Christopher and flees from an abusive relationship. They start to settle into this new community in Pennsylvania, and then Christopher disappears for 6 days. when he finally does come back, he's different. He hears a voice in his head that only he can hear, and it's telling him that if he doesn't complete building a treehouse before the end of the year, then his mother and everyone else in this small town will never be the same again. This obviously has been getting early hype because Stephen Chbosky is so celebrated and it's been so long since his last novel, but I'm really, really excited that his next work is a horror novel. I think it's going to be so exciting to read in October. The final October 1st release that I'm going to talk about is The Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. It's about a woman named Claire who years ago was named the head librarian at this neutral space in hell where all of the unwritten works of authors live. She's head librarian of the Library of the Unwritten wing. So usually her job consists of just kind of keeping everything organized, but also every now and then characters escape from their books to try to track down their authors. But then a character named Hero escapes from his book and Claire has to set out on a mission to get him back along with a couple of companions. As I've said plenty of times in this video, I love books about books, books set in bookish places, and I absolutely love the idea of a special library in hell where all of the unwritten, unfinished books go. So hopefully this is going to be an inventive and interesting read. I have 3 books left that I want to talk about, all of which are being released on November 5th. The first of those is The Book of Lost Saints by Danielle Jose Older. This is for some reason marked on Goodreads as young adult, but from the author himself, this is adult fiction. This book is a multi-generational Cuban story. It is about Marisol, who vanished at some point during the Cuban Revolution, and now her ghost has come back to haunt her nephew, a guy named Ramon, in modern New Jersey, and it is about him sort of trying to uncover where Marisol vanished from, learning about his past. This is on my TBR because I read Shadow Shaper by Danielle Jose Older and really enjoyed it. That one is a YA urban fantasy book, but I really love Daniel online. I loved his writing in Shadow Shaper, so I'm really eager to read this book that is adult fiction. Second to last, I wanted to talk about The Deep by Rivers Solomon, which is, like I said, being released on November 5th. This book is heavily inspired by the song of the same name by a group called Clipping. I'm really excited to read this book because I think all of Rivers Solomon's books sound absolutely fantastic. This one is specifically about the underwater descendants of pregnant African slave women who were thrown overboard by slave owners. They now live these sort of idealized lives in the deep, and most people get to forget their traumatic past, but the main character, Yetu, is in charge of remembering that past. But when all of that pressure, the pressure of that knowledge becomes too much, Yetu flees to the surface. Like I said, River Solomon's books, they just have these genius ideas that sound breathtaking and so expansive. I know that this one is heavily inspired by a song, but it's also one that I think there's so many ideas that can be explored here in a novel, so I can't wait to read more about this world and everything else that's going to be discussed alongside that. And the final book that I'm going to talk about in this video is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I'm still a little bit in disbelief that we actually get a new book by Erin Morgenstern. This is about a graduate student named Zach who discovers this sort of abandoned book in the background of the stacks, and as he is turning the pages in this book, he finds a story about his own childhood. So he sets out on a mysterious quest to find out what this book is and why his story is in this book. I, along with basically everyone, absolutely loved The Night Circus, and I've been so eager to read whatever Erin Morgenstern wrote next, and I am sure that I'm going to love this one just as much as I loved The Night Circus. I am dying to read it. And that's it. Those are all of the adult anticipated releases for the second half of 2019 that I am going to talk about in this video. If you are one of my patrons, you are going to get even more of these titles. I write up a blog post after each of these videos so that my patrons can get a little bit more of what I'm personally anticipating. If you want to look at my anticipated releases shelf on Goodreads, that's going to be linked down below. There are like 260 books on that shelf, so it's a lot to dig through, but I had a lot of books I was anticipating. Also be sure to check out my queer YA releases video and look forward to my additional YA and middle grade releases video that will be coming soon. If there's an adult release that I didn't talk about in this video that you are super anticipating, please let me know what it was down in the comments below so maybe I can add it to my ever-growing Goodreads TBR. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!